Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about contract management solutions and how they can help organizations improve their current contract management initiatives. So, before we get started, we'd just like to quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Kono Fusco, and I'm the media manager here at Therefore.
Hi everyone, I'm Aryan Naimia, documentation specialist here at Therefore, and we are very happy to be bringing you this webinar today based on our concepts of how Therefore can be used for contract management initiatives.
Okay, now before we get started, let's just clarify how you can ask us questions during this webinar. Our Event Center platform has a Q&A function where you can type in your questions directly. You can find this on the top right-hand corner of your screen. So just type your question in the text box in the bottom corner, and once a member of our team has answered your question, the reply will appear right below it. Like always, we'll do our best to answer all your questions during the webinar, but we'll also follow up on any questions you may have by email if we can't get to the question during the event. Alright, well, I think we're ready to go now, so I'll hand it back over to Aryan to cover our agenda for this webinar and a few basic topics surrounding contract management.
Alright, so let us take a look at the agenda for this session. To keep this webinar simple and easy to understand, we have split this session into three separate parts. We'll start by looking at the general process of contract management and the challenges that are faced by traditional contract management methods. This will be followed by looking at how these processes can be perfected through optimizing key attributes associated with contract management solutions. We'll then detail how, therefore, as a document management solution can assist in automating contract management processes. And then we'll take a break from the PowerPoint slides to provide you with a demonstration of how this can be implemented directly from our demo server. So to begin, we will first take a look at what exactly is contract management. Contract management is the process of managing contract creation, execution, and administration for the purpose of maximizing financial and operational performance and minimizing risk. So such contracts are typically made with customers, employees, vendors, or partners. And some common commercial contracts that people are normally familiar with can include things such as master services agreements, employment contracts, non-disclosure agreements, purchase or sale contracts, and distribution agreements. Now, the process behind implementing contract management approaches can be rigorous, time-consuming, and expensive, as we will come to see further into this webinar. So the quintessential contract management process lifecycle begins with the drafting of the contract. Now, this is where the preliminary details are conscripted in a document before they are negotiated with the other party in question. The negotiation process of the contract is the subsequent step in the contract's lifecycle. Now, once the contract has undergone negotiation and is accepted by the parties involved, the next step will be to execute the agreement. So the document would then be stored in a secure repository and made accessible to permitted parties in the event that the contents therein or the relevant actions that need to be taken in order to fulfill contractual agreements can be administered. And lastly, an event for renewal would typically be included in the contract so that the relevant parties included in the agreement can potentially continue their custom. However, there are several challenges that can be encountered during these instances. So, for example, the approval of contracts can actually be delayed. So, for instance, when one of the parties included in a contract have other tasks that have taken precedence or have a backlog of other contracts that need approving. So through traditional contract management methods, it would also be expected to attain manual signatures, meaning that contracts would need to be signed on paper by the respective parties involved. And this could entail long waiting times and inconveniences in dispatching contracts to relevant people or expecting them to make personal appearances. So the parties involved would have to deal with a lot of paper, which can be cumbersome to handle, tedious to organize, and has a negative impact on the environment. And you may find that in paper-based approaches, the security of documents may also be compromised by insecure physical repositories that are vulnerable to theft, damage, or even loss. And there is an issue of maintaining lawful and contractual compliancy in tracking documents, both of which may also prove difficult when dealing with processes contained in a high entropy environment. And finally, keeping tabs on expiration reminders and delayed renewals can also be problematic to achieve without any sort of system to guide you. So to summarize, a typical contract management process contains many steps and areas where things can go wrong, and this could lead to delays and losses of all kinds. So to go into more detail as to what else we can say about the current challenges facing traditional contract management approaches, let's just take a look at a few statistics. According to PricewaterhouseCoopers, organizations deal with between 20 and 40,000 contracts on average. Although these may not all be formal contracts in the traditional sense, it still shows the staggering volume of different types of contracts that organizations are dealing with throughout their years of operation. Forrester's latest research indicated that the average amount of time it takes to create and approve a contract is in the ballpark of 3.4 weeks. PricewaterhouseCoopers again claimed that 12% of a company's total annual costs may be devoted to contract management and administrative tasks, a surprisingly high figure that really shows the massive potential that improved contract management processes can bring about. And finally, it's said that 85% of companies are using manual processes to manage sales contracts. And as we saw on the previous slide, this means that all these companies are facing those very same challenges we talked about and are exposing themselves to risks that are just unnecessary when modern contract management solutions are available. Now, we have briefly gone over some of these points earlier, but I think it is important to reiterate the significance of the problem facing current contract management solutions with a bit more depth. So first, let's take a look at some of the logistical issues that may be experienced by users of traditional paper-based contract management styles. So for one, a lot of time is wasted searching and administering paper contracts. And this is primarily because these have to be sought after manually. Meanwhile, keeping track of contract expiry dates can be challenging when trying to keep up with the manual reminders. And furthermore, due to the physical capabilities of in-house storage facilities, there are limitations to compiling resources into one collective repository. So to extend upon that point, contract management does not necessarily mean that only paper-based documents are kept stored, but it also encompasses multiple media formats such as images and audio and video footage, all of which can take up more resources and prove tough to compile into the same single repository. And finally, even as much as the time and exertions taken to negotiate and send contracts to the relevant people can waste a lot of valuable time and resources for an organization. So what about the issues pertaining to compliance? Well, adhering to regulatory and local policy standards is imperative to organizations that deal with legal contractual matters. But with traditional paper-based approaches, it could be difficult to maintain procedural and legal adherence to regulations, as organizations will have to ensure that they are consciously following their obligatory protocols at all times. So since these companies will also need a physical repository to store their paperwork, they'll need to ensure that they are not at risk of documents being stolen, lost, or destroyed. This may also lead to questions as to whether organizations using paper-based methods could also lack efficient backup and archiving capabilities for their important documents, as well as possible deficiencies in paper trails, accountability, and have an automated process. And lastly, processing weak security measures to control document access could leave documents vulnerable to exposure by unauthorized personnel. And now finally, to touch upon one very important and impactful point relevant to most organizations is the issue pertaining to high expenses. So For instance, the costs could include having to purchase lots of paper, or even acquiring and maintaining expensive reprographics equipment. So let alone the expenditures necessary for procuring physical storage facilities. Now, with all these cost-bearing factors taken into consideration, it would infer that many companies are hemorrhaging money on old technology and archaic processes. But despite all this, our point is that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and which is why we've invited you all here today to talk about how this could potentially be improved. So with all this in mind, I'll now hand over the presentation to Kono, who will talk a little bit about the improvements that can be made to contract management processes.
Yeah, thanks for that, Arian. You're right, there is certainly light at the end of the tunnel, as you said. The truth is that behind every challenge, there's also an opportunity for improvement. So let's first take a look at some of these opportunities. First, let's take this interesting statistic from the Aberdeen Group, which states that 42% of enterprises suggested that the top driver for improvements in the management of contracts is the pressure to better assess and mitigate risks, and also that nearly 65% of enterprises report that contract lifecycle management has improved exposure to financial and legal risk. What this tells us is that many companies are concerned about the risks involved with contract management processes, and that an efficient contract management process can indeed mitigate some of these threats. So we then have to ask ourselves, what brought on this sudden recognition in the importance and benefits of an effective contract management solution? Well, one would be regulatory requirements. Since local governments have become more stringent on protecting consumer rights, organizations are now legally obliged to ensure that they follow the correct protocols and processes to fulfill their responsibilities as service providers. With an increasing population, greater consumer demand, and more market competition, there's also an increase in contract volumes that could precipitate a race towards the streamlining of contract management processes, and thus greater efficiency and outcomes. Globalization, which has made the world a much smaller place, means that ideas and resources can now be obtained outside of just the local context. And finally, the increasing complexity of contracts means that streamlining contract management processes has become more of a necessity than ever before. We can say that the perfecting of contract management processes can be achieved through improvements in control, visibility, and compliance. To explore each of these points in more detail, let's first take a look at the first point. So having greater control over the contract management process means that organizations can achieve greater enhancements over the processes for creation, execution, storage, and monitoring of contracts, as well as bring about an improved standardization of contracts to reflect business-wide needs, policies, and regulatory requirements. Now, when we talk about visibility, improvements in the optimization of contract management processes allow for organizations to possess a single repository of contracts, which of course makes it easier to see the big picture of their obligations and commitments. Of course, increased visibility also means gaining a view of business-wide adherence to these policies and processes, and it allows organizations to trace and account for any actions, modifications, or in general, other processes taken on contracts, which gives them a reliable and easy way to maintain a solid overview of their documents. Finally, a streamlined process will generally also lead to increased compliance, for example, by meeting regulatory requirements on document retention. A good process also ensures compliance with contractual obligations and allows for effective means of macro and micro reporting on contracts. Okay, so now that we understand the background and context of automating contract management processes, let's take a look specifically at how Therefore helps this process. As we saw earlier in the presentation, we're going to be looking at the contract management process as a series of 6 steps: draft, negotiate, execute, store and secure, administer, and renew. We'll be looking at all of these steps in a demo of the Therefore software, which we're going to show you over the next few minutes. And to keep this logical, we've split the demo up into 4 parts. We've got process, sign, secure, and report, so that we can see all of the features of therefore in action. We'll first just quickly explain the background of what we'll be doing in each part before we do hop onto our demo server, just so we can make sure we're all on the same page. So, Arian, if it's fine for you, I'll ask you to cover the theory slide for each demo. And in the meantime, I'll take control of the server and I'll then run through the demo steps for each one.
Sure, that's okay. In that case, let me get started with the process part. So when we talk about how therefore helps you process information, we're referring to therefores automated workflow functionality. So using a simple drag and drop interface in therefore, you can design work processes without any programming knowledge, since it's all based on a visual interface. Specific to contract management, this means you can map out processes for automated routing and approvals of your contracts or related documents. Now, the therefore workflow engine gives you the power to create a fully custom design so you can optimize the process to suit your exact needs. As documents move through the workflow, the system keeps track of every action performed, and the workflow history is recorded for complete traceability. Of course, you can set alerts, reminders, escalation paths, and the like to make sure everything is progressing smoothly, or the right people are being informed in case something is out of place. At the same time, another really useful feature of the therefore workflow is that it can send out automatic renewal notifications in the process. So this means, for example, that you can set a date associated with a certain contract and define some rules about when a renewal should be started. The system can also automatically send out follow-up reminders or change statuses according to the business logic you define. But I'll let Kono explain this in more detail now during the actual demo itself so you can see it directly.
Thanks, Arian. Right, so as Arian just explained, I'm going to show you how you can go through this process for contract management we've been talking about in therefore. Let's start this by doing something very simple. I'll just save a document in therefore. So this is super easy. All I need to do is drag and drop it into therefore. Now, when you do save documents in therefore, you're asked to enter some index data or metadata about the document. And this is relevant information about the document that we can use both to find the document later, and we can also use it while processing the document. All right, so let me now just enter some values here. By the way, for the end date, I'll set it to today just so our demo works smoothly, and you'll see later what I mean by that. All right, contract status is new. Okay. And the client information. All right, done. So let me just save this now. Okay, by saving the document, we've already taken the first step to start the workflow. I can show you here in the workflow inbox that the workflow is already there and ready for processing. So to give you some context, let me first show you what the workflow looks like. I can do this by peeking at the workflow history here. Let me just explain the basics of this first. When our workflow starts, the first task is to review the draft contract. If it's fine the way it is, we can already send it off for approval from the client. However, it's pretty likely that something will need to be modified before the contract can be sent out. That's why we have this loop here to modify draft contract task, so the cycle of review and modification can be done as often as needed while still keeping the workflow in control of the document. So once we're good to go, the document is sent out for signing, and if we need management approval, we have a task for that as well. Now, after that, here's where it gets interesting. Once we get the document back and save it as shown in this task, we start a series of automatic tasks where the system takes care of everything by itself. First, it waits for the contract start date, and once you reach that date, the contract status is automatically set to active. Then the workflow waits, this time for a longer time, until 30 days before the expiration date. At this point, it sends a notification out to review the contract that's about to expire and contact the client if it should be renewed. If the contract, however, doesn't need to be renewed, or if it's declined for whatever reason, the system will automatically set the status to not renewed and then end the workflow. But if the contract is renewed, you see here we can start another loop whereby we wait for the now renewed contract to expire. So we can reuse the same workflow even if the contract is renewed or extended, meaning we have an uninterrupted history of the whole process for this document. Okay, so now we'll get back to the task at hand. So let's open up this workflow instance. Our instructions say that we should review the draft contract and approve or send back for modification. In the viewer here, I can easily scroll through the document and review it. And once I've done that, assuming everything is okay and nothing needs to be changed, I'll just continue the workflow by choosing the option Review Past. So let's take another peek at that workflow history now. We're now at the central point in the process where we need to get that all-important signature from the client. So Arian, do you mind giving us a bit of an explanation on that before we proceed with the demo?
Yes, sure. Let's talk about how Therefore helps you get documents signed. Now, Therefore has a tight integration with the digital transaction management provider DocuSign, which means you can use the DocuSign platform to get documents in Therefore signed with no hassle. There's two approaches to this integration. The first is a manual option, which means you can choose from within the Therefore interface to upload the document directly to Therefore. Of course, once the document is signed, you can also retrieve it and put the signed version back into Therefore. That's what Kona will be showing you in just a minute. But there's also the option to do this automatically. Now, although that won't be part of today's demo, Therefore allows you to send documents for signing through DocuSign using workflow automation. And not only that, the Therefore system can also automatically retrieve documents once they're signed and save them back into Therefore, all without manual intervention. And this is great for those requiring high-volume transactions or companies dealing with standardized or template contracts where the content and process is always the same. But as I said, the focus today will be on the manual method so that we can explain what's happening in the background step by step. So with that, let's switch back to the demo.
Thanks for that explanation, Arian. As we mentioned, we're going to continue with the workflow, which is now asking us to get this document signed. So let's open up this workflow instance. Let's see, we need to send the document to get signed, and we can do that from Therefore directly. I can just click on the button Get Signed up here, and the document is uploaded to DocuSign. Okay, it just needs 2 seconds to connect. Okay, all right, so now we're working with the DocuSign interface. Let's scroll down to the last page where we need to get the signatures. All right, so I can see this is where I need them. First, we need to add the people who'll be signing this. So the first person I need is Kathy. And I'll say, yes, she needs to sign, okay. Now let me add Jacob, our second one. Okay. Done. All right, I'll now place the signing placeholder for Kathy, so she'll have to sign here. And I'll do the same thing for Jacob. Okay, that's it, we're done. I'll just click send and it's already off. So now I can go back to my workflow and say, okay, I've done my job. Contract sent for signing. Let's check in on our workflow again. It's asking me this time to save the signed contract. I obviously need to get those signatures first though. So let me now switch roles and I'll play the role of Kathy. So I can see in her emails that she's received the document. So let me just sign it on her behalf in this case. Okay, so let's do the same for Jacob. Great. So now the contract's been signed by both parties. Let me switch roles once again and become the employee who's going to save this back into therefore. So if I preview the document, I can see it's signed. Good, so let me just use the therefore integration in Outlook to save this. The system automatically recognized the document and knows there was an unsigned version already in therefore. So there's actually two things happening now. The first is that the system sees that the document is signed. So it's already checking the box signed here, which was previously unchecked. Then it's asking me what I want to do with the existing unsigned copy that's in therefore right now. And I have different options to choose from, but I just want to replace the unsigned version with the signed one in this case. So I just hit save, and that's already done. I'll now go back to my workflow and take a look at the document. You'll see here that it's been replaced with the signed copy. That means we can continue with the workflow. I'll just say, okay, contract's been signed. And note that I wouldn't be able to do this unless the checkbox named sign is active in the index data. So there are some controls here to prevent errors. All right, well, we've now finished the heavy lifting, so to speak. But let's check out what the system is doing at this point. So it waited 30 days before the expiration date and then passed the contract on for review. So for demo purposes, let's pretend that we've reached this period of time now, so we have to look into reviewing the contract. So I have two tasks here. Review the contract conditions first. Okay, being a document in therefore, I can either make the changes to the existing document or add something else, like an appendix or notes or whatever. I'll then contact the customer for renewal of this document. You could do this within the workflow by adding more tasks, either to change the document, add to it, or get it signed again. But to keep this demo more compact, we'll just assume that we've done this already. If we click Renewed, as I mentioned earlier, the document will get pushed back into the waiting loop and wait for the new expiration date to come around. But if the contract should not be renewed for whatever reason, we'll just click Not Renewed and the workflow will end. Now, before we finish this part of the demo, let me just show you what the completed process actually looks like. We can see how the process was completed visually with the arrows, and we can also see all the actions listed in a table, neatly formatted with additional information and timestamps. So the workflow, therefore, is completely traceable, and it's also auditable in case anything needs to be reviewed at any point. Scrolling through the list of tasks here also gives me a nice visual representation of how the workflow was completed, so it's easy to follow the steps.
Thanks for that, Kono. I think you taught me something new, actually. I didn't know that scrolling through the list of tasks in the workflow history showed the arrows moving along the workflow path. I guess you can always learn something new even if you work with a product every single day. Anyway, Let me now tell you about how Therefore helps you by providing strong access controls. There are also two aspects of this we need to mention. First, we want to draw attention in particular to Therefore's robust retention policies, which essentially allow you to automatically migrate your data to primary or backup storage and secure your documents for the legally required time period. This is also automated without user intervention and helps you by maintaining complete records in case of an audit. Also, access permissions are another area where Therefore excels. There are complete customizable permission settings that allow you to restrict access to documents, so they can only be viewed by authorized personnel. And of course, you can also log and track actions performed on all documents in the system, should you need to do so. Now for this, we're going to show you a quick example of what these two tools look like in Therefore.
Right, so let me show you briefly how this is done in Therefore. Now this is getting a bit more technical here, but I know there's a lot of technicians watching this presentation too, so I'll take the time to give you a quick rundown. So first we talked about retention policies, which help you keep track of your documents and make sure they're not deleted before a certain period of time. So if I open the Therefore Solution Designer, which is our administrative program, I'll go down to the storage section and take a look at my retention policies. You can see I already created a policy here called Contracts 5 years. So let's see how I set this up. I said I want to delete old documents, and then I chose 60 months, which is of course 5 years. Of course, you can change this to whatever amount of time you want. But we can choose how to measure these 60 months, and in this case, I chose to base it on the end date that's listed in the index data. This means the document will be retained for 5 years after its expiration date. When it comes to access permissions, Therefore has a really easy way of doing this. If I check out the category we were using in this demo, I can view the security by just right-clicking and selecting security. Here I have some basic permissions set up, with admins having full access and regular users having only read and write permissions. Now, of course, I can break this down further, like if I want a specific user to have special rights. So if I click the advanced permissions here, I can see all sorts of specific permissions which I can individually allow or deny, which gives me full flexibility in deciding who can access parts of the system and what they can do. Since the permission structure is hierarchical, I can make it easier to assign similar permissions by going to the next highest level. So for example, if I assign these permissions on the folder, they'll be inherited by all the categories below, so I don't have to do it individually.
Okay, so now we've come to the final part of the demo. We're going to speak about a really neat feature in Therefore, specifically the business analytics tool that you can use to measure what you manage. We're going to be taking a look at both options that Therefore offers for this. The first is Therefores SQL reporting tool, which lets you view pre-configured reports on your data and processes on demand. You can also set a schedule for this so that reports are automatically generated and saved at certain intervals, giving you an automated way to keep track of your analytics. Another option is to use sleek and modern reporting dashboards, which Therefore can create using its integration with Microsoft Power BI reporting platform. So Therefore can synchronize data with the Power BI cloud, and you can use this data to create elegant and responsive dashboards using Power BI's reporting design tools. So on that note, Kono, do you mind giving us a quick tour of these functionalities?
Yes, just give me a second to bring the demo server back up. Let's see. Okay. All right. So let's first look at the ad hoc reporting. This is something I've pre-configured in Therefore, but I won't show you the nitty-gritty details of that. I'll just show you the end result. So if I'm in Therefore, I can just go to my reports here, and I'll right-click and select Create Ad Hoc Report. I can view this directly in the navigator here. I can also save it if I want. I can also just choose to view all existing reports, and I can see them all listed here. So let's see, let me view this one from the end of the month. As you can see, this is a report I configured for the workflow that we were using earlier. And I can see here that it's covering the data for the entire month. The pie chart shows me very simply how many workflow instances were completed on time and how many were overdue. The system is also telling me that on average, it took 13.8 days to complete the entire process for a single document. And if I scroll down, I can also see some interesting stats on the open instances per task. So throughout my workflow, I can see the number of instances that have yet to be completed at each stage. The blue ones are those that are still on time, while the overdue tasks are marked in orange. Now, as Arian mentioned earlier, we can also look at this data in Power BI. A really cool feature of Therefore is that you can embed the Power BI dashboard directly in the software to give you a totally seamless experience. You don't need to access other applications to view the data. So let me show you how this works. I'll just grab my dashboard link here, which I got from Power BI, and I'll embed it in Therefore. Let me just give this a second to load. Okay, and we're there. So we're using the exact same data that we saw in the previous report, only this time we're viewing it in the dashboard. The advantage of this is not only that it looks nicer, but the dashboard is also synchronized with the Power BI cloud to show you up-to-the-minute changes if you want. So let's say someone completes these 2 overdue tasks here. As soon as Therefore sends that message to Power BI, the dashboard is synchronized, and we'd see these charts change to adapt to the new information. So while the SQL reporting feature does a great job with regularly scheduled reports or ad hoc reports on demand, the Power BI integration keeps a constant updated overview of the data you're measuring. Okay, so I think we've reached the end of our demo for today. Arian, do you mind wrapping up the presentation at this point?
Yes, of course. So now we've seen basically the impetus for change, and we also looked at how to bring this about using Therefore. Let's quickly recap by going over the benefits of an automated contract management process. Now, the obvious one here is the reduced costs. You can decrease the costs of paper, decrease or eliminate costs of physical storage facilities, and reduce the necessity for reprographics equipment. All of this adds up to significant savings at the end of the year. Now, another benefit is the increase in efficiency and productivity that you can get by automating the contract management process. And this all leads to faster handling times and a higher ability to manage large changes in contract volumes. And on top of all that, we can also get benefits to how you control your documents and comply with regulatory standards. An automated solution can also give you clear visibility into the process and potentially help you maintain good relations with your clients. And of course, the nature of a secure digital repository means you can maintain sound records for compliance purposes. Now, finally, an automated solution like Therefore gives you a massive benefit in terms of your document archive. Digital storage is very secure, and you can easily control access to prevent unauthorized viewing or tampering of data. So documents can be misplaced or lost, since backup copies are automatically retained even in the event of a primary data loss. Okay, so we hope that you enjoyed this session and were able to learn more about contract management processes and how they can be automated and streamlined using Therefore. So just a few quick reminders before we let you go. We'll review the questions that you've submitted during the session and send out a follow-up email to all of today's participants with the responses. So definitely keep an eye out in your inbox. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact us at marketing@therefore.net. The email addresses of our other departments for any other questions that you may have unrelated to today's webinar are also displayed on this page, as you can see. So just as a reminder, all 4 installments of the Therefore webinar series, including Therefore for HR, what the GDPR means for you, Therefore for finance, and now Therefore for contract management, are available on demand. Finally, we would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for having joined us today, and look forward to seeing you all again for future webinars.